Alex Pache. I'm a second-year PhD student in the Geography, Planning, and Environment Department at Concordia. And the title of my presentation today is Underwater Trees in the Pre-Colonial Forests of Gespe'gewa'gi. So I study environmental change using tree rings. And human environmental change has happened for millennia at different scales and intensities. West from Montreal, we have the Anishinaabe people. Traditionally, they would burn land to promote bison populations and berry harvests. And then east from Montreal, the Abenaki and the Iroquois would have maize, squash, and bean agriculture. But in the 20th century, environmental change by humans is much more intense and higher scales. In the Iwichi region of Western Quebec, the Cree people have been profoundly affected by the hydroelectric dam projects. Here we have my friend Freddie Jolly. He, in protest of the damming of the Rupert River, he hiked to all 9 Cree communities, hundreds of kilometers with a radio in hand, yet they still flooded his land, his ancestral burial and trap lines, as you can see in this picture. And this creates underwater forests. This happens all over Quebec. These underwater forests release mercury that accumulates in the food chain and causes other disruptions. And even the trees outside of water in Quebec aren't looking so good. They've been subjected to a lot of human-induced change over the past few centuries. So now let's go over to one of my research areas, which is Gespe'gewa'gi, specifically the Parc National de Gaspésie. And right outside the park, you can see from satellite images, it's very clear-cut and it's new regrowth otherwise. And we actually witnessed this in real time as we were sampling on top of a mountain over a few weeks. Even within the park, there was clear cutting happening until the 1980s, and those parts of the park are the most vulnerable to insect epidemic and fires today. This is bad news for the caribou population around here because they're the last population east of the St. Lawrence River and they need old growth forests to survive, but there's hardly any left. But regardless, pretty much every old growth forest south of the 50th parallel in Quebec has been clear cut. And this is an issue for many reasons, but as a tree ring researcher, this is a lot of information lost. Because trees hold information about past environmental conditions in their tree rings that they grow every year. So let's say we want to look at past moisture levels. We'll go to trees that are particularly water stressed, so on a rocky cliff facing the sun, and if we take a bunch of samples of their tree ring widths, we will see that they're related to moisture. So we go and get instrumental data, so from weather stations, and for the period where we have ring widths and precipitation data, for example, we'll find when it was rainier in a year, the rings are thicker and vice versa. So when this relationship is strong, we can model it and create reconstructions of past climate, like moisture and temperature. But tree rings also hold other information beyond climate, such as fire history, insect epidemics, even nuclear disasters, and other parts of source dynamics. And so what we're going to be doing is creating this sort of reconstruction of moisture and fire dynamics for specifically these relic forest types of old growth cedar groves around lake shores. And this was a forest type that used to be all over the place, but because of forestry in the 1800s and on, they were all destroyed. And this method was called la drave. La drave is when, before mechanized forestry, in the winter they would cut a bunch of trees, bring them to the lake shores, and then in the spring when the water levels were high, they would make rafts with them, flood all the rivers to make them wide enough for their wood, and bring it down to the St. Lawrence River. And what this would do it would flood all the forests around the lakes, even when the species that they weren't targeting, and it destroyed all the old growth cedar groves. But luckily, there are 2 lakes at least that escaped this fate through their unique geography. And so we will be studying those lakes by sampling the trees that are still alive there and also the trees underwater. So what we can do is make a base chronology with the live trees and then dive in the water, get these underwater trees which have been preserved for hundreds and hundreds of years underwater because cedars tend to fall over into the water. And we'll get a long history, hopefully up to 1,000 years of fire history, of age dynamics, and even moisture history in the region. And this is important because these are relic old growth forest types that haven't really reappeared in the regions where the forests have grown back after La Drave. So we're in the early phases of our project. We've done sampling in one of the lakes and we're processing those samples. We have more sampling to do. But I think it's an important time to acknowledge the cultural context of our project because we're on unceded Mi'kmaq land, specifically the Gespe'gewa'gi district. And you can see their land on the nativeland.ca website. And here you can specifically see our two sample sites in the west and the two recognized Mi'kmaq communities a bit more east. So we have Listigouge and Gespe'gewa'gi, which both rely heavily on fisheries and also have some forestry, as they have around 50 kilometers square of land and are determined to have more. And I'm grateful for this book written by the Gespe'gewa'gi Mi'kmaq community, and as well as the APTN series, which I've only been able to access the clips, but I've learned a lot about their people, and I encourage you to check out both of them if you're interested. So thank you for listening. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this project progresses, and if you have any questions, please email me. Thanks.